Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy the story. Remember to like and subscribe. And now the story.
This happened over a year ago during the height of the pandemic in mid-2020. I'm 29 male and am a homeowner. I bought a house in 2019 from my uncle because he was well set and wanted to retire to his second home by a lake. Before buying the house, my uncle warned me that the neighborhood has an HOA, but it only affects those who joined it. And my uncle did not. But the price my uncle was offering was half the home's value. I couldn't pass up the offer. So I bought a house in an HOA neighborhood that wasn't a part of the HOA. Right after I moved in, I got a knock at the door. And when I opened it, I was greeted by an older woman with short-grained blonde hair and face covered in thick makeup, and was holding a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA, then asked to come in so she could help me fill out some forms. I knew what she was trying to do because my uncle warned me. She did this to every new homeowner in the area who wasn't a part of the HOA, so I quickly and bluntly stated I was not going to join her HOA. Her smile quickly disappeared, and she started saying that I did not have a choice, as all new homeowners are mandated. I told her I knew in advance that was a total lie and that I will not be paying any dues or fines, and will be ready to call a lawyer if I have to. She called me a thorn to the neighborhood and said she'd be back, though we did not speak to each other for some time. I expected her to start sending me fines in the mail, but the most I usually got were letters stating that my grass was getting too tall or my driveway needed sweeping. Those never bothered me because they are normal home chores and need to be done regularly anyway. But several neighbors that were on the HOA side made it clear they didn't like me because I didn't join, just like my uncle. I said that was fine. We're neighbors, but we don't have to be friends. They said that was fine too because I'm an outsider and they'll never accept me until I join the HOA later in early 2020. I got word from a friend that people were starting to buy a lot of disinfectant, toilet paper, and hand sanitizer en masse. I decided the best option was to order these things online. I got 8 big 12 packs of toilet paper, a case of 20 bottles of hand sanitizer, 3 boxes of disposable latex gloves, a couple of boxes of disposable face masks, and a case of 20 large cans of name-brand disinfectant spray. I set for the delivery to be signed for only as I did not trust anyone not to steal my packages if they were just left on my porch. When the packages were delivered, several neighbors saw me getting lots of toilet paper and some other packages that contained the other stuff. And just because I'm paranoid guy, I still bought more of the same stuff when I saw it in stores. Like those small cheap 4 packs of toilet paper or off-brand disinfectant sprays. I bought them because I had a feeling some friends or family might need some soon. And I was right. As expected, toilet paper, disinfectant, and sanitizer pretty much disappeared from store shelves for miles around. And people were fighting over HOA hoarding it. Meanwhile, I got a very generous supply that I still haven't come close to using up. Though word of my supply got around fast when people started needing some. A friend of mine ran out of toilet paper and had no hand sanitizer. So I gave him a couple of the generic 4 packs of toilet paper and a bottle of sanitizer at my door. A few family members ran out too, and I shared with them as well. They were all extremely grateful. But I ended up with several neighbors knocking on my door and asking to buy my supply or wanting handouts. But I refused and said I only gave some of what I had away to friends and family. And they made it pretty clear to me before that we'd never be friends since I refused to join the HOA. So if I were to give some to one neighbor, they'd all want my supplies. And then I'd run out really fast. They didn't like this and harassed me several times from the sidewalk. But I just ignored them. Later, the HOA Karen showed up at my door and told me several neighbors had run out of all the items that this post is about. Then said she wasn't asking, but demanding I share my stock with my neighbors to set a good example. I told her to buzz off because that had nothing to do with me. I may be a jerk, but I'm a well-prepared jerk. And I've read her HOA bylaws online. So even if I was a member of her HOA, which I was not, I wouldn't have to give up my stock either way. She left while yelling at me that one day I'd regret not being a good neighbor or being a part of her HOA. The next time I went to work, I was notified around noon by the cameras I had at my house that there was a thief breaking into my home. I could see video of them on my smartphone, and it looked like a woman in a spandex suit with her face covered by a hockey mask. I called the police immediately and was allowed to clock out at work so I could rush home. Right around the time I got there, the cops were walking HOA Karen out in handcuffs to a police cruiser. She'd broken into my home by using a crowbar to force open the back door and was tossing all of my toilet paper and any other supplies she could grab out into my backyard, where her kids were picking it up and bagging it. I pressed charges, and HOA Karen got 6 months in jail and probation. HOA Karen's husband called me to apologize for his wife and told me that he had been planning a divorce for a while because this isn't the first time she's been in trouble with the law, and CPS got involved too because she was using her kids to help steal from me. So he was going to file for full custody in the divorce. HOA Karen didn't return, and someone new was elected HOA president in her place. Her husband didn't move, and I see him from time to time. And there's no hard feelings between us? And yes, he did get full custody of his kids, because his wife had a longer history with the law than I thought. We're sort of friends now too, as we've occasionally had a beer together, and he helped me replace my back door that his ex broke. I'm making this post more than a year later because I just saw HOA Karen again. I was visiting some friends in another city and saw her working at the local supermarket there, bagging groceries. As soon as we saw each other, she obviously recognized me because she scowled and refused to look at me again the entire time I was there. Karma is a real bitch, isn't it, Karen? So some quick backstory to this. I don't live with an HOA, thank the divines, but I have had dealings with them. I studied environmental engineering in college and have a degree with a specialization in water treatment systems. Normally, though, that's not my day job. Even so, recently, a friend of mine who works with one of the neighboring cities asked me if I wouldn't mind doing some tests for water pollution in a waterfowl preservation area. There had been some strange die-off events going on, and the city was trying to figure out where the source of the pollution was coming from. I'd be operating under a special contract from the city and was given access to any location along this waterfowl area, within reason, to perform my tests. I won't go into detail about how the tests work. They're involved and can be a pain in the ass, but suffice it to say that I started taking water and soil samples from likely sources along the waterfowl preserve's borders. This showed me that there was a notable amount of nitrates and phosphates in the water, which I surmised was affecting the birds. Now to find the source. I followed the river up its length, passing a number of housing sites, a couple of apartments and the odd settling pond. Over the course of several weeks and a barrage of tests, these were ruled out as sources. The further I went up the river, though, the stronger the concentrations became, to the point that it was dangerous for humans to even be in contact with the water. We're talking Superfund-type pollution. This was last summer. As I waded up along this area, I heard some splashing and the sounds of kids playing in the water. Not good at all. Turning the bend, I come face to face with a small dock leading into the water and 4 or 5 kids taking turns jumping off it into the water. The heavily polluted, dangerous water. There's some lady sitting on the dock watching them, and I approached her. I forget the exchange, but it boiled down to me telling her I'm from the city, and based on some of what had been found, the children were banned from swimming in the river. The lady tried arguing the point until I told her I was calling the Marshal Code enforcement to have the area barricaded off and she could explain her complaints to him. She grabbed the kids and scuttled off. Marshal did arrive, found that the dock wasn't built with proper code standards, and condemned it, forcing the HOA who had built it to have it demolished within the week, or the city was going to do it, and they'd front the bill. That still left the matter of the pollution. That's where things got weird. Once I passed this HOA subdivision, all pollution vanished. I must have done 5 or 6 further tests to verify this, but yeah, no pollution. So I had my culprit. The next question was figuring out what they were doing. That's where my investigative side comes in.
With the help of the marshal, I started going around the properties of the HOA, talking with residents. It was a few simple questions like, do you know if they're fertilizing the grass? And when did they do this? And do you know the type of fertilizer they use? Just gathering evidence?
Remember the lady from earlier?
Turned out she was the HOA president. I only found this out after she called the police on the marshal and I, reporting strange men wandering around her neighborhood.
She called them something like 4 times in a day before the police flat out told her, they work with the city, and if you keep calling, we're charging you. That didn't stop her from following us around in her car and taking photos with her phone. Eventually, we spoke with one older gentleman that broke the case, as it were.
The HOA president had been fining people for not having perfectly green grass.
We were in a drought at the time, so that's no surprise there.
After several of the people in the subdivision got fined by the city for watering their grass, she had taken matters into her own hand. She'd first tried contracting a landscaper to spray the lawns with fertilizer, but due to various EPA regulations, he'd apparently refused. The homeowner couldn't be certain what the lady had done next, but a couple days after that, some guys turned up with a large farm-type trailer of liquid and sprayed every single foot of grass the HOA controlled.
Even right down to the water's edge. With the homeowner's permission, I took several soil samples from around his property, and then samples from the common area that joined the grassy area beside the river and dock. It took about a week to get full results back, but I had my answer. This lady had some contractors or someone spraying farm-grade fertilizer on the grass. This particular fertilizer is heavily controlled by the EPA and requires a special license to even possess, much less use.
I presented all my evidence to my contact at the city and laid out just how serious the damage was, and that I was legally obligated to report the HOA to the state regulatory board for gross violations.
My contract took the papers and paid me for my services, thanking me, but also noting that if this went to court, I would need to testify about my findings.
The court was originally scheduled for March of 2020, but it never came to that. The HOA president entered a plea deal with the state, where she and the HOA was required to pay for the environmental cleanup of the river, as well as restitution to the state.
The fines alone topped close to $250,000, and the cleanup, still ongoing, is expected to break $1 million itself. The HOA president got the boot, while the HOA itself was, last I heard, facing being dissolved by the state due to multiple cases of negligence and inept management. I don't know how they came in contact with that fertilizer, though I suspect some of the charges against the HOA president had something to do with that.
Want to know the sad thing, though? If the HOA had simply contacted the city or the state, they would have been given a list of approved fertilizers to use, which both wouldn't have polluted the surrounding water, and wouldn't have put them on the hook for an environmental disaster. The number is right on the city and state's website. The HOA just couldn't be bothered to look it up.
So my uncle bought a piece of land and built his house on it several years later. Several houses were made around him, and an HOA was formed. He never joined it because he hated the idea of HOAs. The whole problem started when my uncle saw several kids playing in his backyard. Now my uncle has 7 dogs, 2 are bloodhounds, 1 was a pit bull, and the rest were mutts.
So he was worried that the kids might get bitten by a dog, so he built a fence around the border of his land. It took him 3 days to finish. However, the day after he finished, he gets a fine from the HOA for building the fence without the permission of the HOA. He ignores it, since he is not part of the HOA, and the fence is on his land and was not breaking in rules. A week later, someone from the HOA comes to talk to him about the fence, and he says he is not paying the fine because he is not part of the HOA. He then explains why he built the fence. The HOA apparently thought he had 1 dog and not 7.
My uncle says goodbye, thinking they had come to an agreement that the fence was fine, but my uncle would paint it, which he already planned to do. He had just not gotten around to it. The next day, however, he gets several fines, one of which was for his dogs, and another was for the fence. He again ignored it again. Several days later, he buys 2 white paint cans and starts to paint the fence. However, while he is doing it, several people that live there walked by, some said hi, Others just glared at him as they walked by. He paid them no mind, and after a while, several people from the HOA came by to complain about the color he chose. He didn't understand what was wrong, after all it was white. So he asks what was wrong with it, and they said they didn't approve him building the fence, let alone painting it.
They proceeded to say that he has to tear down the whole fence by the end of the week, and then request for permission to build the fence again.
He refuses and says again that he was not part of the HOA. This turns into an argument where his dogs are brought up.
By the end of it, they were threatening his dogs. By this point there was a small crowd gathering watching, so my uncle calms himself down, picks up his paint and goes back home. 3 days later, while he was walking around the inside of the fence, he finds several pieces of bacon covered in a white powder.
When he picked them up, he realized they smelled like a chemical, and he realized that someone was trying to poison his dogs. Getting super pissed, he installs several cameras around the fence to find out who it was. He actually gets them on camera one night, so he goes to the HOA's meeting that was happening next month.
When he gets there, it turned out that the person trying to poison his dogs was the HOA's president. I would call her Karen. He hadn't even met until then.
He still showed the video and even brought some of the bacon as proof, and said that if it continued he would contact the police. After that, the bacon stopped being thrown into his yard, and she was voted out and later moved somewhere else.
It wasn't until a month after the Karen moved that he was told the kids he saw playing in his yard were the Karen's kids.
And that since he built the fence, they had been complaining non-stop for months that they could no longer play there.
And my uncle only didn't call the cops immediately because he had some bad run-ins with them when he was younger, and didn't trust them to not screw him over.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.